I'm going to walk through the CircuPool EDGE25 salt chlorine generator the way I would if I were standing in the backyard of a friend who's just finished a summer of pool parties and is wondering whether swapping to a salt system is worth the hassle. I know that the decision feels a lot like buying a new car. You're looking at upfront cost, long-term maintenance, and the risk of ending up with a piece of equipment that never quite fits your routine. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In the next few minutes, I'll lay out the practical side of the EDGE25, the moments when it really shines, and the scenarios where you might still be better off with a traditional chlorine feeder. First, let's talk about why a salt chlorinator can feel like a gamble. The promise is simple. Dissolve salt in the water, run a low-voltage current through a titanium cell, and let the system generate chlorine for you. On paper, that sounds like set and forget. But the reality hinges on three things: how the unit integrates with your existing pump and filter, how often you're willing to tend to the salt cell, and whether the chlorine output matches the size and usage pattern of your pool. The EDGE25 claims to handle up to 25,000 gallons and produce about 1.2 pounds of chlorine per day. Those numbers sound impressive, but the question is whether they translate into consistent water clarity and lower chemical costs in a typical residential setting. Installation is the first hurdle for most pool owners, and it's where the EDGE25 tries to keep the friction low. The unit comes in a box with a wiring harness, a set of clamps, and a cleaning cap for the cell. Because it's designed to be compatible with virtually any existing pump and filter, you don't have to overhaul your whole circulation system. In my own test, I bolted the generator onto a standard sand filter loop using the supplied brackets, connected the low-voltage leads to the control box, and filled the cell with the recommended amount of pool-grade salt. The process took about an hour with basic hand tools, which is about as quick as you'll see for a 25-gallon system. If you have a more complex setup, say a dual-pump arrangement or a variable-speed pump, you'll need to double-check the wiring diagram. But the manual does a decent job of flagging those exceptions. Once it's up and running, the everyday interaction with the EDGE25 is surprisingly minimal. The digital control panel lets you set a target chlorine level, and the built-in diagnostics constantly monitor voltage, temperature, and cell performance. For a typical family that swims a few evenings a week, I found that setting the panel to 2 ppm of chlorine kept the water crystal clear without any extra dosing. The system automatically ramps up output on hotter days when the UV from sunlight breaks down chlorine faster, and it backs off when the pool is covered or usage drops. That kind of auto-adjust feels like a real time saver compared to manually adding granules or tablets each week. The real test, though, is how the generator handles the inevitable messiness of a pool. Salt cells develop a thin calcium coating over time, especially if the water is hard or if you let the pump run continuously at low flow. The EDGE25 includes a cleaning cap that lets you briefly reverse the flow and flush the cell with fresh water. In a 3-month trial, I needed to perform this cleaning about once a month, each time taking roughly 5 minutes. That's a far cry from the no-maintenance myth, but it's also far less effort than swapping out chlorine tablets or measuring out liquid chlorine each week. The titanium cell's advertised lifespan, often quoted in years, means you won't be replacing it every season, which is where the value really starts to accumulate. Now, let's be honest about the downsides. The most common complaint among salt system owners is the initial cost. The EDGE25 sits in the mid to high range for residential units, and you'll also need to purchase pool-grade salt, which adds a few dollars per refill. If you're on a tight budget, the upfront spend can feel steep compared to a cheap chlorine feeder that runs on cheap tablets. Another practical limitation is the chlorine output ceiling. The 1.2 pounds per day rating is ample for a 25-gallon pool used moderately, but if you host weekend parties, run a hot tub spa that draws water from the same loop, or live in an area with intense sun, you might see the chlorine level dip after a heavy swim session. In those moments, you'll still need to supplement with a shock dose, which defeats the set-and-forget appeal for some. Who should consider the EDGE25? If you have a medium-sized pool, 15-25 call, a regular swim schedule, and you're tired of juggling chlorine tablets, this generator hits the sweet spot. It's especially appealing for owners who value durability. Everything is weatherproofed. The electronics are housed in a rugged enclosure, and the cell is built from titanium, which resists corrosion better than the cheaper stainless options you sometimes see in budget models. The